It didn't actually begin with my wife not coming home that night. That's what I told people later because it sounds like a clear starting point. A wife disappears for the night, doesn't answer properly, gives some vague explanation. That's the kind of moment people expect in stories like this. But the truth is, it started earlier. With a photo. It was a Thursday night. Nothing unusual about it. I was sitting in the living room around 10:30 p.m. half watching some forgettable show while scrolling through my phone. The house was quiet. Emily had told me earlier that she had a late work event, some networking thing connected to a project she'd been involved with for weeks. That wasn't strange. Her job in marketing involved a lot of those events, conferences, presentations, after-work drinks with clients. Over the years, I'd gotten used to it. Sometimes she came home energized and talkative, telling me stories about coworkers. Sometimes she came home exhausted and went straight to bed. That night, I expected one of those two outcomes. Instead, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from our shared cloud album. Emily and I had set it up years earlier so our phones would automatically upload photos. Back when we first did it, it felt like a small romantic thing, our lives automatically collecting memories in one place. Vacation pictures. Our dog doing something ridiculous. Random moments during road trips. Over time, it just became background noise. Photos appeared there all the time without either of us thinking much about it. So when I saw the notification, I opened it without really paying attention. At first, the picture didn't seem important. It was clearly taken outside at night, somewhere high up. Behind Emily there were city lights, blurred but bright, and a glass railing that made it look like some rooftop bar or terrace. Emily stood near the edge holding a drink, and she was smiling. But she wasn't alone. There was a man standing beside her. I had never seen him before. Now, I'm not someone who jumps to conclusions. Emily works with dozens of people, and I've seen plenty of photos of her with coworkers over the years. Group photos, conference pictures, office parties. But something about this image made me stop scrolling. It wasn't anything obvious. Just small details that didn't sit right. The man's hand rested on her back. Not on her shoulder like coworkers often do when posing. Lower, comfortable, natural. The kind of touch that suggests familiarity rather than politeness. And Emily's expression felt different too. It wasn't the polite, professional smile I'd seen in dozens of corporate photos before. It was softer, relaxed, like she wasn't thinking about cameras or coworkers or work at all. The two of them looked like people who were completely at ease standing close together. I stared at the image longer than I expected to. At first I told myself it meant nothing. Maybe they were just colleagues. Maybe someone else had taken the picture and they were just standing next to each other. Maybe I was tired and overthinking it. Still, something about the setting bothered me. This didn't look like a corporate event. There were no banners, no conference rooms, no tables with name tags. It looked like the kind of place people go after the official event ends. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere private. I zoomed in slightly, studying the background like it might reveal something. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from Emily. I opened it. Hey, I'm not coming home tonight. I'm staying at Lisa's place. I just need some time to think. That was the entire message. No explanation. No context. No mention of what had happened or why she suddenly needed space. Just that. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time. I looked back at the photo. The unfamiliar man. His hand on her back. Her relaxed smile. And then this sudden message about staying somewhere else for the night. My brain tried to assemble the pieces in a way that made sense. Maybe something had happened at work. Maybe she had gotten into an argument with someone. Maybe she and Lisa had decided to have a late-night talk. There were plenty of explanations, but none of them felt quite right. What bothered me the most wasn't even the message itself. It was how casual it felt. No apology. No explanation. Just a short statement that she wouldn't be coming home. I typed a reply asking if everything was okay. The message showed as delivered, but she didn't respond. Minutes passed, then half an hour. Eventually I put the phone down and tried to watch the TV again, but I couldn't focus on anything happening on the screen. My thoughts kept drifting back to that photo. I opened it again, looked at it longer this time. The more I studied it, the more certain I felt about one thing. The body language between them wasn't accidental. It was comfortable, familiar, and familiarity doesn't appear in a single evening. I went to bed around midnight, though sleep didn't come easily. The house felt strangely quiet without Emily there. At some point I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember was the sound of the front door opening early in the morning. Emily walked in like nothing unusual had happened. She looked tired but calm. When she saw me in the kitchen, she gave a quick smile and said good morning. For a moment I considered saying nothing, pretending everything was normal. But the image from the night before was still stuck in my mind. So I pulled out my phone and showed her the picture. "Hey," I said casually. "Who's this guy?" She barely glanced at it. "Oh, that? Just someone from work." Her tone was dismissive, like the answer should be obvious. I waited a moment, expecting more explanation. None came, so I asked again, a little more carefully. "You two looked pretty comfortable." She sighed. Not angry, not defensive, just annoyed. "Mark," she said, rubbing her forehead. "You've been stressed lately." "That wasn't what I asked." "You're reading way too much into things," she continued. "He's just a colleague." I tried to explain that the photo had simply caught my attention. That was all. But somehow the conversation slowly shifted. Instead of explaining the situation, Emily started explaining me. How I'd been tired lately, how work had been exhausting, how sometimes people imagine problems when they're under pressure. Within a few minutes, the conversation was no longer about the photo. It was about my supposed paranoia, my overthinking, my stress. Technically, she had answered the question. Technically, she had given an explanation. But something about the way she avoided the actual situation made my stomach feel heavy. Because deep down I already understood something important. That photo hadn't just shown me a random moment. It had shown me the first crack. And once you see the first crack in something you believed was solid, you start wondering how many others you missed. After that conversation about the photo, I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. That's what people do when something feels wrong, but they don't want to face what it might mean. You start creating explanations that make the situation feel safer than it actually is. For the rest of that day, Emily acted completely normal. She made coffee. She answered a few emails. She even told me about some boring issue at work involving a delayed campaign. If someone had walked into the house at that moment, they would have thought everything between us was perfectly fine. But once the idea entered my mind that something might be wrong, it was like a switch flipped inside me. Suddenly, my memory started replaying the last few months in a completely different way. Small things I had ignored before now felt different. For example, I remembered how Emily's morning routine had changed sometime earlier that year. She used to get ready quickly, throw on whatever outfit felt comfortable, do light makeup, and rush out the door with her coffee. But recently she had been spending much longer in front of the mirror. At first I thought it was because of work pressure. Marketing involves presentations, meetings with clients, that sort of thing. Still, I couldn't ignore the fact that she had started buying new clothes more frequently. Not casual clothes. Things that looked deliberate. More expensive dresses. Shoes she normally wouldn't wear to a regular office day. Then there was the lingerie. That one came back to me suddenly while I was sitting alone in the living room later that night. A few months earlier, a package had arrived at the house while I was working from home. I had brought it inside without thinking much about it. When Emily opened it, I noticed what was inside. New lingerie. Nice stuff, clearly not cheap. At the time I had made a joke about it. Planning a surprise for me? She laughed and said something about a sale she couldn't resist. But the strange thing was, I never saw her wear any of it. Not once. Back then I assumed she was just saving it for some future moment. Now I wasn't so sure. As the evening passed, more memories kept surfacing. Late meetings. Sudden team dinners that hadn't existed before. Business trips that seemed slightly too frequent. At the time, every explanation had sounded reasonable. Her company was growing. Her role had become more important. Of course, there would be more responsibility. Of course, there would be more events. But sitting there alone in the quiet house, I started seeing a pattern I hadn't noticed before, especially when it came to her phone. Emily used to be careless with it. She would leave it on the kitchen counter, on the couch, sometimes even forget it in the car. But somewhere along the way that changed. Gradually, subtly, she began placing it face down on the table. If a message appeared, she would quickly swipe it away before I had time to accidentally read the preview. Sometimes she would even pick it up and walk into another room to answer a call. The first time that happened, I asked why. She told me it was just a colleague discussing something confidential. That sounded reasonable. Except it kept happening. More and more often. I remembered one evening in particular. We were sitting on the couch watching a movie when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her entire expression changed. Not in a bad way, but in a way that was private, like she had just received a message meant only for her. She quickly stood up and walked into the kitchen to answer it. When she returned a few minutes later, she said it was work-related. At the time, I believed her. Now I replayed that moment in my head and realized something. She hadn't looked annoyed. She hadn't looked stressed. She had looked excited. That realization made something in my chest tighten. Because excitement isn't how people react to work problems late at night. And then there were the business trips. Emily had always traveled occasionally for conferences or meetings, but over the past few months those trips had become more frequent. The strange part wasn't the trips themselves. It was how she acted when she came back. Normally, when someone returns from a work trip, they're exhausted, jet-lagged, ready to collapse. But Emily often came back, energized, more cheerful than usual, almost glowing. At the time, I assumed it meant the trip had gone well. Maybe she had closed an important deal. Maybe she had impressed someone higher up in the company. Now I wondered if there had been another reason for that energy. Another detail surfaced. Something so small I had forgotten about it completely. Emily had started using a particular perfume again. It was one she used to wear only on special occasions, anniversaries, weddings, nice dinners. But recently she had been wearing it on ordinary workdays. Not every day, just often enough that I noticed the scent when she walked past me in the morning. Back then I even complimented it once. "You smell amazing." She smiled and thanked me. But now that memory made my stomach twist, because it suddenly felt like the perfume wasn't meant for me. The more I thought about everything, the clearer the picture became. It wasn't one dramatic moment. It was dozens of tiny changes, each one easy to ignore by itself. But together they formed something much harder to dismiss. I sat there for a long time that night, listening to the silence in the house. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think the thought I had been avoiding since I saw that photo. What if the problem wasn't in my imagination? What if the distance I had been feeling wasn't just stress, or work pressure, or my own insecurity? What if it was something far simpler and far worse? Because when I looked back at the past few months honestly, one thing became impossible to ignore. Emily hadn't just been busy. She had been living part of her life somewhere else. And I was starting to realize I might not even know where that other life was happening. The truth revealed itself much faster than I expected. And the strange thing is, it didn't come from anything I did. I didn't hire a private investigator. I didn't secretly follow her somewhere. I didn't even check her phone. Instead, the first real piece of proof arrived in the most ordinary way possible, through a message from someone who had absolutely no idea what he was about to show me. It happened about 4 days after that photo appeared in the cloud album. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a message from a guy named Daniel. He was someone I knew through a professional network, more of an acquaintance than a friend. We had worked on a few projects together over the years and occasionally exchanged messages. Nothing unusual. His text said, "Hey man, random question. Is Emily in Seattle this week?" That immediately caught my attention. Emily had told me 2 days earlier that she would be attending a corporate training event in Portland. According to her schedule, she was supposed to be in workshops all week. So I replied, "Yeah, she's traveling for work. Why?" A few minutes passed before Daniel responded again. Then another message appeared. "Okay, maybe I'm mistaken. I thought I saw her earlier today at the Harborview Hotel lobby here in Seattle." Right below the message, he attached a photo. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. When I did, everything inside me went completely still. The photo had clearly been taken casually, probably from across the lobby. Emily was standing near the reception desk with a suitcase beside her. And next to her stood the same man from the picture in the cloud album. This time there was no rooftop bar, no dim lights, just the bright, unmistakable lobby of a hotel. They weren't just standing together. They were checking in. The man was leaning slightly toward the receptionist while Emily stood beside him looking at something on her phone. At first glance, it could almost look normal. Two co-workers arriving at the same hotel for a conference. But then I noticed the detail that made the entire situation collapse. The man had his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Not awkwardly, not accidentally, comfortably, the kind of touch people use when they already know each other very well. I stared at the photo for what felt like several minutes. Daniel sent another message. "Sorry if that's weird. I just recognized her and thought I'd say hi, but they looked busy." He had no idea what he had just done. I typed back something vague, thanking him and saying he probably just saw her colleague. Then I put the phone down and leaned back in my chair. For a moment, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel shocked either. Instead, I felt something much worse. Clarity. Because suddenly every doubt I had been wrestling with over the past few days disappeared. The strange photo, the overnight stay, the late meetings, the new routines. Everything snapped into place with brutal simplicity. Still, part of me needed absolute confirmation. Something undeniable. And strangely enough, that confirmation came the same evening. Years earlier, Emily and I had created a shared email account for travel bookings. We used it whenever we reserved hotels or flights for vacations. Over time, we both stopped paying much attention to it. But the login still worked. So that night, sitting alone in the quiet house, I opened my laptop and signed in. At first, the inbox looked exactly as I expected. Old flight confirmations, receipts from vacations we had taken together, a few promotional emails from travel companies. Then I noticed something recent. A hotel reservation. The date matched the current week. The location matched the city Daniel had mentioned. My chest felt heavy as I opened the email. It was a confirmation from the Harborview Hotel. Room reserved for 2 guests. Paid privately using a personal credit card. And right there, listed clearly in the reservation details, were 2 names. Emily's. And the man from the photos. In that moment, the final piece of doubt disappeared. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a confusing situation. It wasn't even a one-time mistake. This was a relationship, carefully organized, carefully hidden, and built on a foundation of lies that had been quietly growing right inside my own marriage. I closed the laptop slowly and sat there in the silence. Strangely enough, I didn't feel the urge to call her. I didn't want to confront her. Not yet. Because for the first time since all of this started, I understood something important. If I confronted her now, she would deny everything. Or cry. Or twist the situation until I somehow became the problem again. But now I knew the truth. And knowing the truth meant I didn't need to react emotionally. I could do something much more effective. I could prepare. Because if Emily thought she was living a double life without consequences, she was about to learn how wrong she was. Once I saw the hotel reservation, something inside me changed. Up until that moment, my thoughts had been chaotic. Anger, confusion, disbelief. My mind kept jumping from one emotion to another. I kept replaying memories, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. But the second I saw both their names in that reservation email, the chaos disappeared. In its place came something much colder. Clarity. I closed the laptop slowly and sat there in the quiet kitchen, staring at nothing. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second sounding louder than usual. I expected myself to feel rage, to feel the urge to call her immediately, to demand answers. Instead, I felt calm, and that calm scared me more than anything, because it meant I had already started thinking about what came next. The easiest thing would have been confrontation, Most people in my position would have called their spouse immediately. There would have been shouting, accusations, maybe tears. But I already knew how that conversation would go. Emily would deny it, or she would cry, or she would turn the entire situation into something about my trust issues and my overthinking. I had seen that tactic before, and now that I had undeniable proof, I realized something important. Confrontation would only give her time to prepare, time to erase messages, time to move money, time to change the story. So instead of confronting her, I did something she would never expect. I stayed completely silent. The next morning, Emily called me around 9 a.m. Her voice sounded normal. Too normal. "Hey," she said, "just checking in. How's your day going?" For a moment I wondered if she felt even the smallest hint of guilt while speaking to me. If she remembered the vows we made. If she thought about our life together at all. But I kept my voice calm. "Busy," I replied. "Work's a mess this week." She sighed sympathetically. "I know that feeling. These training sessions are exhausting." Training sessions. The lie slid out of her mouth so easily it almost impressed me. I could practically see the hotel lobby photo in my mind while she said it. Still, I didn't challenge her. I simply asked a few casual questions about the conference. She answered smoothly. If I hadn't seen the evidence myself, I might have believed her. That conversation told me something else important. Emily had no idea that I knew the truth, which meant I had time. Time to think clearly. Time to prepare. And the more I thought about our situation, the more I realized how much control Emily believed she had over our life. To friends and coworkers, she had carefully built a certain image. In that image, she was the driving force behind everything we had. The successful professional. The ambitious one. The person whose career supposedly supported our lifestyle. And to be fair, she was good at what she did. Her job paid well. Her network was impressive. But what most people didn't know was that our real financial stability came from something else entirely. For years, I had been quietly building investment projects. Nothing flashy. No social media posts. No big announcements. Just careful work. Real estate partnerships. Long-term investments. A few small tech ventures that had grown slowly over time. Emily knew about some of it, but she had never paid much attention. To her, it was just something I did on the side. What she didn't realize was that those projects were the reason we could afford the house we lived in. The vacations we took. The lifestyle she enjoyed. And as I sat there thinking about everything, a new idea started forming. If Emily believed she could live a secret life while still enjoying the stability I had built, then maybe it was time for that stability to change. Not out of revenge, but out of reality. Because suddenly, I saw our marriage from a completely different perspective. I wasn't the man desperately trying to hold a relationship together. I was the man who had quietly built the foundation she was standing on. And if that foundation disappeared, so would the comfortable world she believed she controlled. That afternoon I started making calls. Not dramatic calls. Not emotional ones. Just quiet, practical conversations. First, I spoke with my financial advisor. Then with a lawyer I had worked with years earlier on a business contract. I didn't tell them the full story right away. Just enough information for them to understand that I needed to review certain documents. Accounts. Ownership structures. Access permissions. It was amazing how calm the process felt. While Emily continued living her secret life hundreds of miles away, I began reorganizing mine. Every document I reviewed made something clearer. Our marriage hadn't just been built on trust. It had also been built on assumptions. Emily assumed things would always remain the same. She assumed the life we had created would continue regardless of her choices. But assumptions are fragile things. And the more I prepared, the more I realized something else. If this situation was going to end, and now I was certain it would, it needed to end on my terms. Not in a moment of anger. Not during a dramatic argument. But carefully, precisely, the way you remove a piece from a structure without letting the entire building collapse. By the time Emily returned from her training conference, everything would still look normal. The house would be the same. The conversations would sound the same. But underneath that surface, something fundamental would already be changing. Because while she thought she was managing a secret relationship, I was quietly preparing for the consequences of it. And unlike her lies, my preparations didn't rely on deception. They relied on patience. And patience, I was starting to realize, can be far more powerful than anger. For the next several days, I behaved exactly the way Emily expected me to. That was the key to everything. If she had noticed even the smallest change in my behavior, she might have started asking questions. She might have checked accounts, looked at documents, or become cautious about whatever secret life she was living. But nothing about me changed. When she returned from her training conference, I picked her up from the airport like I normally would. She walked through the arrivals gate with her usual confident stride, rolling her suitcase behind her. When she saw me waiting, she smiled warmly and hugged me. For a moment, anyone watching us would have thought we were a perfectly normal married couple. "How was the conference?" I asked casually while taking her suitcase. "Long," she said with a laugh. "I'm exhausted." Exhausted. The same word she always used after those trips. Except now I knew exactly where she had really been. Still, I didn't push. I didn't question her story. I didn't even mention the photo or the hotel reservation. Instead, I asked about her coworkers, the sessions she attended, the networking dinners. She answered easily. Almost too easily. If there had been an award for convincing lies, Emily could have won it that night. But I simply nodded along and kept driving. Because by that point the truth wasn't something I needed to argue about. It was something I was preparing around. Over the following week, I continued working quietly behind the scenes. The first step involved our financial structure. Most of our joint lifestyle expenses, mortgage payments, investment accounts, shared credit lines, were tied to systems I had originally set up years earlier. At the time, it seemed logical to give Emily convenient access. After all, we were married. Trust made everything simple. Now, I was simply restoring reality. My lawyer explained the process carefully. Nothing dramatic needed to happen. No accusations. No announcements. Certain accounts could be reorganized legally. Access rights could be adjusted. Ownership structures clarified. Everything done slowly and correctly. From the outside, nothing would look different. But gradually, the automatic financial safety net Emily had grown used to would begin to change. And it started with small things. The first was a credit line tied to one of my investment projects. Technically, it had always been mine, but Emily had access to it through a shared card. That access disappeared quietly. The next adjustment involved a secondary account used mostly for travel and discretionary spending. The structure shifted. Again, legally and cleanly. No alarms. No notifications. Just a different arrangement of responsibility. At home, life continued exactly as before. Emily went to work every morning. She talked about meetings, colleagues, deadlines. Sometimes she mentioned that same mysterious coworker, the man I now knew she had shared a hotel room with. But she never used his name casually. Only in passing. And always in a way that made him sound unimportant. Listening to those conversations was almost surreal, because I already knew the truth. Meanwhile, my preparations continued. During that process, I also learned something unexpected about the man she was involved with. His name was Daniel Carter. And apparently, this wasn't the first complicated situation he had created. One evening my lawyer called after doing some basic background research. "Off the record," he said carefully. "This guy has a reputation. Not criminal, but questionable." Apparently Daniel had already been involved in at least one workplace scandal in a previous company. Something involving inappropriate relationships with colleagues. The situation had never turned into a legal case. But the rumors were strong enough that it had quietly affected his career. Hearing that information didn't make me angry. It actually made the situation clearer. Because suddenly Emily's choices looked less like some great romantic story and more like something far more predictable. A man who enjoyed pushing boundaries. A woman who believed she was in control of a secret situation. Neither of them realizing how fragile that illusion actually was. Then the first visible consequence appeared. About 2 weeks after Emily returned from her trip, she walked into the kitchen one evening looking slightly confused. "Hey," she said, holding her phone. "Did something happen to the travel account?" I kept my voice calm. "What do you mean?" She frowned slightly. "My card got declined earlier when I tried to book something for next month." I nodded slowly. "Oh, that account's being reorganized. Some investment restructuring." That explanation was technically true. She studied my face for a moment, as if deciding whether to ask more questions. But then she shrugged. "Oh, okay." And just like that, the moment passed. But something about the situation had already shifted. For the first time in years, Emily encountered a small barrier in the comfortable system she had always taken for granted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even a serious problem, just a minor inconvenience. But it was the first sign that the world she believed she controlled was beginning to change. And she had absolutely no idea why. Meanwhile, events at her workplace were beginning to move in a direction neither she nor Daniel seemed prepared for. Because when private relationships start overlapping with professional environments, they rarely stay hidden forever, especially when other people begin noticing patterns. And according to the information I had started receiving quietly through professional contacts, some of those patterns were already raising questions inside her company. Questions that would soon grow much louder. The interesting thing about consequences is that they rarely arrive all at once. They arrive piece by piece. Small shifts, small cracks, until eventually the entire structure starts to collapse. And Emily still had no idea that the first cracks had already begun forming. The shift at her company began quietly. A few coworkers started asking questions about why Emily and Daniel kept appearing at the same events, the same trips, the same late meetings. Soon it reached management. Policies about workplace relationships suddenly became relevant. Daniel backed away the moment things looked risky. He stopped answering her messages. The confidence Emily had always carried at work slowly disappeared, replaced by something I had never seen in her before: uncertainty. When Emily finally came to talk to me, she wasn't the same person who had dismissed my concerns weeks earlier. The certainty was gone. She tried to explain, but by then explanations didn't matter anymore. I had already stepped away from the life we once shared. Her betrayal didn't destroy me the way she might have expected. Instead, it forced me to see things clearly. And the message she once sent saying she wouldn't come home that night had unknowingly become the beginning of my exit.